Ossobuco is a dish that you'll find on menus all over Italy. And for good reason. It's a great cheap cut of meat that has a lot of flavor when you cook it the right way. Welcome to Actually Italian. I'm Sal and I'm on a mission to help you cook authentic regional Italian cuisine. There are lots of different variations of this recipe all over Italy. The one we're making today comes from Milan, so it's Ossobuco alla Milanese. Alla Milanese just means in the style of somebody from Milan. If you're looking for the perfect Sunday lunch, then you've got it. This is it. Let's dive right in and see what we need to do to get this started. Essentially, Ossobuco is a cut of the shank it can be from a cow, it can be lamb, it can be pork, it can even be turkey. Ossobuco means bone with the hole. So you can see the bone there with the center of marrow. That's the key to this dish. The marrow is going to melt into the sauce, and that's what's going to give it a lot of richness. Not only that, but this connective tissue here is also very gelatinous, and with slow cooking, this gently melts and also releases into the sauce. And since this is a muscle that gets a lot of work, since it's in the leg, it's tough. You have to cook this low and slow. In this case, at least an hour and 15 minutes or so. Aside from the meat, another key component is the onion. This is going to play a big part in the dish. You want a lot of onion. I have these small ones, so I'm using 2. We'll just give them a quick clean, and then I'll show you how I want to slice them up. So since it cooks for a while, if I dice it, it's going to melt. I want it to hold somewhat of its shape, so I'm going to cut lengthwise instead of cutting widthwise, so that way it kind of stays together. So you can see it's almost like a wedge. The onion can be any kind of onion, but if it's a sweet onion, then that's going to work best, because I think the sweetness really works with the richness of the meat. The only thing left to prep now is the meat and then some gremolata, which we'll go over after. So for now, we're going to salt and pepper the meat, and then we're going to dredge it in some flour. Now, the typical meat that would be used for this in Milan would be veal. I try to avoid veal when I can. I don't eat a lot of veal. So in this case, we're using pork shanks. I think it's going to be better actually, because pork has more flavor, it's got a little more fat in it too, so I think it actually improves the dish to use pork. All right, we've got it salted and peppered, so we're just going to lightly dredge it in the flour. Shake it off there because we don't want excess flour. We want some flour though, because the flour is what's going to thicken the sauce. That and the onions. When the onions start breaking down, it releases all their sugars into the sauce, and it makes it thick and creamy. And then the flour is going to really turn it into a gravy essentially. And we don't need a lot here. All right, this is done. We're going to go right to the pan and start cooking, and then we'll prep the gremolata, which is just a garnish. I've got a heavy bottom saucepan here, and I'm going to add the ossobuco to some olive oil and butter over medium heat. Actually, I'd say medium high right now, because we want to get a nice brown on these. But we also want to make sure that we don't burn them, because that flour has a tendency to burn, so we don't want it too high. It's probably going to take maybe 3 minutes per side to get the brown that we're looking for. So it's been about 3 minutes, and that's about what we're looking for. It's got a nice deep colored crust there. Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for. That's going to add a lot of flavor to the sauce. So we'll let this brown on this side, and we're going to take them out and add the onions in a minute. Italian cuisine is very regional, so certain dishes look different from region to region. This is a really good example. If you were to go to Tuscany, for instance, and get this dish, it wouldn't look the same. They would have some tomato paste, maybe even some tomato sauce in there, sofrito, which is carrot, celery, onion. That's a base for a lot of different soups and stews that is not in this dish. We're just using onion in this case. I took a little bit of the fat out of the pan. It just was a little bit too much. Then I lowered the heat down to low. We don't want these onions to get overcooked here. We'll give them a little bit of salt, just so that way they start to release their liquid and get them fully coated in the oil here. So that way they start to break down. That salt is going to release some of the liquid, so that way we can kind of scrape up the brown bits on the bottom. That's all going to be flavor. We want to see that. Without that, we wouldn't have too much flavor, and that's why you don't want to use a non-stick pan. This steel pan is going to create that those brown bits. In Italian they call it the fondo, and in French they call it fond. And again, that's the base of our sauce here. So I'm just going to cover these up and then give them a few minutes and check on them. The onions are starting to break down a little bit and release some of the liquid, but not enough to scrape up these bits here. So I want to slow this cooking down because we're not trying to brown these. They're not caramelized onions. So this is going to be the time to add the white wine. You'll hear me say this a lot on this channel, that it doesn't matter what kind of wine you use, as long as it's good enough that you would want to drink it. So this would be a wine that we'll drink with this entree, so that's one that we'll cook with. You only need about a half a cup anyway, so it's not like it's a ton. Now, you could use red wine for this, but I like white wine with this meat because it's not very dark. Well, I'll get into that more in a second. Here, let's try to get this evaporated. So if you were making this with lamb or beef shanks, then I think red wine would work fine. But with veal or pork, or if you use turkey, you really want some white wine. That acid in the white wine is going to really balance out the fattiness of the dish. So, all right, this we want to continue to let evaporate here. Once this is like almost a syrup, then we're going to put the meat back in and put some water in. That wine's reduced quite a bit now, so we don't want to wait for this to get dry. All that alcohol is evaporated, so this is ready for the meat. So I'm just going to push the onions aside, and we'll put the meat back in the pan. We also want to get this juice that's come off of the meat. We don't want to waste that. Again, that's all going to be flavor. Now we can start putting the onions kind of on top of the meat, so that way they don't cook down too much. It's almost like kind of to protect the onions. Finally, we'll add some water. Not that much. We just want it to go like maybe halfway up the meat, like that. Because we're not looking to make like a soup here. We're trying to make it almost like a gravy. You could use chicken stock or beef stock or whatever you like, but I like using water for this because, again, we want to keep it on the lighter side. It's going to be rich enough. So we're going to cover this up. We're going to let it cook for half an hour, and then we'll check the water just to make sure it's not too dry. Total cooking time is going to be about an hour and 15 minutes, so we just want to check it about halfway through. We're going to make the gremolata now, which is a garnish that you see on a lot of meat dishes, especially slow-cooked meat dishes. It's garlic, lemon zest, and parsley, and it's just mixed together. So we want this finely grated. So we'll grate the garlic on this this microplane grater. Probably a half a clove, maybe about that much. We don't want the garlic to overpower it. Then we're just going to grate a little bit of the zest of a lemon. Again, not even really that much. We don't want it to be heavy on one flavor over another. So I'd say probably equal part garlic to lemon zest. And then we're going to do the parsley to finish it off. So I'll just bunch it up. We want it finely chopped here. We don't want big chunks, because essentially this is going to get sprinkled over and it's going to brighten up the dish. So we don't want big chunks of leaves. We just want the flavor of that parsley and that kind of freshness of it to cut through that richness. Now, you don't want to put any oil in this either. we want it to be light and airy because we've got plenty of oil and fat in that dish already. You also want to put this on after it's cooked. We don't want to cook this because then it defeats the purpose of it. You lose all the brightness when it's cooked. So we'll just put all that in there. Now we want to give it a good mix. Get everything evenly distributed through that. So when you sprinkle it, every bit is going to have equal portions of parsley, garlic, and the lemon zest. And that's about all we need for that amount of meat that we did. It's just a little bit. It's been a half an hour and we're going to take a look now. So a lot of the liquid has evaporated and it's gotten pretty thick there. It's also evaporating a little too much. See, when I pull that away, it kind of takes a little bit to fill back up there. That means it's getting a little too thick. So we want to add some water because this still has about at least another half an hour to go. So we just want a little bit, maybe a quarter of a cup at this point, because we don't want to, we want this to be kind of a thick gravy. We don't want it to be like really wet. So that's probably good. I'm going to taste it for seasoning. I'm not going to put any salt in now, even if it needs it. I just want to see. Yeah, we'll definitely need some salt later, but we want to add it later. So that way it doesn't get too salty, because this is going to reduce. I'm going to cover it back up, and then we're going to check it again in another half an hour. It's actually been 45 minutes since the last time we checked it. Now, word of warning, we had a very close call here. After 20 minutes, the sauce reduced by too much. It was very close to being burnt, but I caught it in time. So check it every 20 minutes because it can actually happen pretty fast. Now, after 30 minutes, it still wasn't quite there, so I left it for another 15 minutes. Now we can see that the sauce is nice and rich. It's very creamy. This is exactly how we want it. Now let me just check it for seasoning. It needs a little salt. So I'm going to take these out of the pan, season the sauce, and then we can actually taste it. Okay, I just added some salt, and this is perfect. That's like the exact consistency we're looking for this gravy. All right, I already know how good this is going to taste just by looking at it. We've got that rich, deep brown gravy. We've got the green bits of the gremolata kind of working on there. We cooked it for about an hour and 15 minutes, so it's going to be tender. It's not going to be falling apart like a pulled pork or anything like that. Let's take a look here. So yeah, we can just basically pull it off with the knife. Like, we don't even really have to cut it. So that texture is yeah, this is what we're looking for here. I'm going to give it a taste. So that texture is exactly where I want it. It's nice and tender, it's soft, but again, it's not like shredding. Then that little bit of gremolata on the top, where one bite you take and it has a nice fresh brightness. You can really taste the garlic through all the other flavors. And then there's another bite that's nice and rich from the onions and the gravy. The sweetness of the onions is working to balance this out. The acid from the wine also really helps, and this is another reason why I'm glad we didn't use a red wine, because it really lightens a dish up and makes it easier to eat a lot of it, I guess. I've got my bread here, crusty bread. I've got my red wine. The only thing missing is some saffron risotto, because traditionally this would be served with saffron risotto in Milan. That makes it the alla Milanese, which I didn't do today, but I do have a guide, a step-by-step guide on how to cook the perfect risotto. So I'll leave a link, I don't know, up here or maybe down in the description. So if you want a step-by-step guide for risotto, you can use that. All you do is add a little saffron to the broth and you've got your risotto alla Milanese. Anyway, I'm going to finish up, I'm going to dig in, and I'll see you next time.